strange sexual tension of like the vision of in the dream of being sort of lying flat on the ground on the tarmac of the airport and the pie graph shape between my legs that the raven is coming. I mean, it's like the raven is the guy, right?
Yeah.
And like I mean, I could sort of see the poetic logic of the dream, and so I think I started writing because I could see that, and I figured writing would also help.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those are some powerful images to get down. That's, I mean, that's always interesting because I agree. There's this balance that you have to achieve with something like that. The page is not. I mean, writing through something is incredibly valuable, but actually putting it out there for other people to, again, that has to be something in some way that somebody is going to be able to connect with, that is going to be able to appreciate whether they've had that experience or not. And like consequently, the poems as therapy is one thing, but poems published should not be your therapy.
No, right,
necessarily.
Yeah.
And it's there are still things that are from, at this point, I guess, like 20 or 30 years ago that I find I can just now begin to write about, in a way that I think can be artful. So there's I don't know, the distance somebody needs sometimes just varies greatly, I guess.
I think that's true. And it's a difference, too, between direct address and going slant.
Right.
Because, the stuff that's deepest in us is going to be coming out whether we are ready or not. You know what I mean? And so it's probably true that the stuff you did that didn't feel like, that felt like turning away from it or not being ready for it, or it was probably there in some
and I would notice
ways.
it coming out in some themes, rather not addressing it directly, or I would notice it being fictionalized, and for some reason, because, I don't know, I think that you can have some great truth in fiction, and some great fiction and poetry. But there's just, for some reason, again, as you're not wasting space and, and paying so much attention to every word, it feels like, I don't know, you have to really kind of do that thing of writing, at something or towards something, but not, on the nose so much.
Right.
So the last thing I'd like to talk about is hold. It's as you're mentioning, it is very central to everything surrounding it, and it is long, and I don't, so...
Yeah, it would take a while to read the whole
It would, but there's a particular section here that I would like, the section that has, that contains the title, of the collection, because, for me, when I was reading that, when it got to that point, I then knew, it all became clear to me why you titled the collection that. And I would just kind of like to have you read through that section, and then to talk about why you felt that needed to be.
Okay. I mean, I think I might, before I read it, I'll say that the poem, this poem begins with a reference to a book that I was reading at the time that I wrote it, and that was Roy Scranton's book, Learning to Die in the Anthropocene, which is this kind of ecological lament. It's a very hopeless book, and part of his argument in the book is that it's the arts and the humanities that will help us not survive the environmental crisis, but die gracefully. I mean, that is basically the premise of this very intense, interesting book. And one of the arguments that he makes is that we have become, as a culture, obsessed with thriving, not just surviving, not just living a nice life, but like everything has to be at the nth degree of saturation and richness, and that idea, it was extremely interesting to me, and in a way, I think that's the idea that was the fulcrum that made it possible for me to write this poem doing the thing I was talking about at the beginning, which is addressing large sort of things outside the self from a a vantage point, very much inside an individual person. So that's the sort of story of how where my brain was when I started to write the poem, and the section that you're talking about.
Well, and I just to interject really quickly, I think that there was something that was a major point of connection for me, was because at this point it's not a matter of if so much as when, and how do you want, how do you go towards the light, I guess.
Yeah. So I think I'm going to read from a little sooner, just so that people can understand and follow. And there's a moment in the poem where the speaker is talking about the fact that a thing that I'm interested in is that there are times when the world seems so beautiful, and you can be in a place where you're so isolated and see something incredible, and it's very hard to believe in the presence of that natural beauty that everything's about to die, you know, and yet this book is super doomy. Yeah. And so I'm sort of, I'm in that place at this point in the poem, about seeing a bird and just being stunned by its beauty. And so that's the beginning of section 10 of the poem. The joy that comes from the heron and awe and gratitude, they also came when I found that glowing secret lake of violets filling an indent of New Hampshire hills. They come when the ocean furls and flickers in a pink stripe of dawn. And they come, too, when the moon leans forward over the mountain, huge, like an award for being in love. Love, too. These ardors we take mostly as reassurance, proof that all will be well. My book says doom is too large an idea, our helplessness too large. We can't embrace a solution that renounces the only life we know. And yes, ardor is a high we still get to feel. You might decide to find yours and breathe it and not tell a soul. I don't mean ardor will save us, ka-ching, only it's better than no ardor, and better than our other hunger to accuse. Worm, be with me. This is my hard time. Does the book mean to say only art and thought, can hold sway? Sway as in solace or solve?
It's a wonderful poem. I love that section, but there's this to speak to that moment of the ridiculousness of that too. It's hard to when you'll watch the news, which is increasingly difficult to do. Mm-hmm. And somebody's like, well, look at this snowball. Clearly global warming is a myth, and it's like,
yeah,
not somebody, there's just, it's almost hard to enjoy the moment when you can have that, when you can appreciate what's around you, when you know that, well, if somebody were paying attention to this right now, they would say it disproves science. There's a as a person who thinks about the world as a whole and can see, the ice shelf of Antarctica shrinking, and eventually this is going to cause a huge problem, and it may not be within the lifetimes of policymakers, but it's going to happen. And there's at this point, there's like, you can slow down the process, but there's no going back. Mm-hmm. And that it's almost like, I don't know. It's there's just a level of wrong-mindedness that's there when somebody uses an argument of look at this one isolated thing and using it to say the entirety of everything else going on, and everything you can read and everything you can see, just all of the storms that didn't used to be around like they are now, all the intensity of everything. It's insane to me. But and so to kind of have that where you can appreciate it is hyper valuable, despite the doom that's coming. So thank you for reading that. Thank you for doing this. Yeah. This is a wonderful cover too. Do you want to talk about the artist at all?
I would love to. Yeah. When in 2015 I had my first sabbatical, having just got tenure, and I had studied French as a high school and college student, and I had spent some time there, but when I moved to Arizona, it was too far and too expensive to go back, and I hadn't been there for 20-some years, and I felt like if I could go to France, I could see if I still had French. So it was sort of unrelated to writing in a certain way. I thought, like, this is a window of time when I could actually leave the state for long enough that it's worth going far away, and maybe I still have a little of this language, and maybe I could therefore wake it up and keep it going. So I found a couple of residencies, and I applied, and I got into this place called Camac in a little town about an hour southeast of Paris, and I started setting up to go. And when I got to France, they told me that there were no other writers. I assumed, first of all, wrongly, that most people would be French, and second of all, that there would be writers. And so I had this hope that I would meet a person who would translate each other's work, and it would be this kind of development. And then it was all visual artists, and they were from Brazil and South Korea and Iran and Norway and the Czech Republic. And then there was me, and this turned out to be strangely lucky. I mean, first of all, I loved listening to them talk about their work. There were tons of visual arts events around this area that we would go to sometimes in the evenings together, and we'd pile into the Czech guy's Land Rover and drive off across the countryside. And I felt like I could talk to them about my work in ways that I would have probably felt shy about if it had been a group of writers. And so the day that I wrote the big first entry into that poem Hold, I got to dinner and I was feeling like $1 million. It was that spent feeling of like, I have been thinking hard and I've been working hard and this is happening and it's working, and like I have spent 10 years trying to find this territory of intimacy, but in a not about an intimate relationship. I was like really psyched, and so I ended up describing a little bit the work I had done, and it's a rudimentary English that is used in an international context, right? That's the main common language, or it was in our case, and yet, I had to speak slowly and, and in sort of rudimentary ways. And I ended up saying that I was excited about this. And a few weeks later, the Czech artist, Jan Vichar, talked about the fact that he'd been there longer. He'd been there like 3 months, and he was basically finished with the work he had come there to do. And he proposed that we make an artist's book of one of my poems. And I was blown away. That was a thrilling idea to me. And he goes, and it will be that poem that you told us about at dinner. And I was like, no. That poem the English is complicated. It's colloquial. It's filled with allusions and references to American things. Like, it's a terrible idea. And he was like, it is the best thing you have ever done. And you said that. And I was like, well, yeah, I still kind of think it is. And he was like, then we make it work. And so he started working on that poem and this idea of an artist book. And his other artist books were sort of, book-sized and small. It turns out that what he made it's 26 inches by 20 inches. So if you open it up, it's as tall as a person, right? It's 5 feet long, almost. And it has 62 pages, and it's the poem, the full poem of Hold is in there, and then all these images he made in reply to different parts of it. And while he's been working on that over the last 3 years, he's also made like big floor-to-ceiling works. The one that's on the cover of Hold Sway is called The Wave, and it comes from the wave in the poem Hold. And it's a PVC relief. He's a lino-cut guy, so it's not a print.
It took a moment, like just looking at it from the top, you wouldn't know. You would think it was a painting, and then to see the strips of everything on the floor, it's just a fascinating process.
It's
I would
perfect,
love to see it. Yeah.
Right? It's perfect for the poem. It's really beautiful. It conjures the my brain is empty. The Japanese wave painting, right?
Yes.
You sort of see that, but then it's this plastic that's like shredding down, and so the poem that ends the book is called Near Eternal Materials. And that poem wasn't written yet, even I think when Jan made this thing, but